I never thought that I'd enjoy an action camera quite as much as I have with this, and it turns out since I got it, Insta360 have made it even better. Today we're looking at the Insta360 X4 and we'll be sharing with you what I really think to this camera. Should we all go out and buy an Insta360 right this second? If you do, make sure you stick around because I'm going to be sharing with you all the tips and tricks that I've picked up over the last month of having this camera. I'm also providing classic entertainment as I share with you how bad I am at maths, and I put my 31-year-old self through the ringer as I decide to go out and try mountain biking for the very first time in 15 years. The things that I do to make these videos entertaining enough for you guys is just, I hope you're grateful. That's all I'm gonna say. So let's begin with one of the most important things for me as a videographer, image quality. Now, my only real experience when it comes to using action cameras is when I used to fly FPV drones back in the day. And I'll be honest, the footage was never great. However, at the beginning of this year, I got to use the Insta360 X4 for some client work where I had to make a VR video for an exhibition. And for me, a lot of action cameras in general have really mushy looking footage. It's never quite as crisp as I would like. And when it comes to the shadows, they always look a little bit just not there. But playing devil's advocate for a second, the sensor which are inside these action cameras are fairly small. But maybe it's just the videographer inside of me that desires the cleaner footage. So how does the footage from the Insta360 X4 look? The footage which is in the highest quality, which is 8K, looks amazing. Clean for the most part. And if I'm honest, for the first time I've been able to look at my footage and compare it to the adverts footage and be like, okay, this was shot on the same camera, because we've all been there with other brands. You're like, that can't have been shot on the same cameras I've bought. But there is one thing that I have noticed with the footage, and this is just me wanting to be really thorough here. In certain areas of the image, there is some noise. And this is mainly in the shadows, which is always to be expected if anything, but the rest of the image being crispy and sharp massively outweighs the small amount of noise that you do get in the image. Plus there's ways to get rid of that noise which takes no time at all, but I'll get to that shortly. But there is one thing I need to make crystal clear. Even though this camera does take 8K footage, that 8K is shared across two sensors, one on the front, one on the back. So when you're watching this footage back on a 4K timeline, you're not getting 8K footage downsampled to 4K. I don't actually think you'll be getting a 4K image because that 4K image is for the entirety of what that camera sees. But does that really matter to you? I'll let you decide. Now 8K is limited to 24, 25 and 30 frames per second. So if you're wanting to film in 60 frames per second or 100 frames per second, you're gonna have to change the resolution down to 5.7K or 4K respectively. But just stating the obvious, the quality of the image is going to drop. Something I do want to touch on, but not go into great detail, is the video settings that I've used to capture pretty much all of the footage you've seen in this video. All of this footage has been shot using fairly standard settings. We could get into the debate of motion blur and shutter speeds, but honestly, this is an action camera, and when you're using an action camera, everything's going to be fast paced. So I want everything to be really simple to use. For the most part, anytime I want to record something and play it back in real time, so 24 or 25 frames per second, I'll record at 8K. Obviously, this gives me the best quality image that I can get from this camera. I've also decided to use the flat profile rather than the standard or the vivid, but why? A flat profile, for those that don't know, means that your image has less contrast and less saturation. This gives you something which is called more dynamic range, or in simple terms, a higher chance of seeing the detail in the brightest parts of the image, such as the clouds, but also the darkest parts of your image as well. But don't be concerned about your image looking a little lifeless, because you can add the contrast and saturation in later on. I also feel like the standard and vivid profiles add a little bit of sharpening to your image, something that I don't prefer to do. I would sooner do it later on myself if I feel like I want to, but this is down to personal preference. I also switched the white balance to be manual instead of auto because I don't want the camera changing from cool to warm or vice versa halfway through the footage. And if you're completely new to what white balance is, here's a couple of numbers to get you started. If you're outside filming on a really hot sunny day and there's no clouds, you want to set that white balance to be 5,500. And if it's a cloudy day, set that to be 6,500, but obviously tweak this as you wish. Pretty much what you want to do is adjust that number so anything which is white in real life looks white when it comes to looking back at your footage. As for everything else, I leave it as standard. I'm not too bothered about controlling the shutter speed or the ISO because those two things alone when it comes to exposure isn't enough to get the exposure low enough in most situations. And we don't have accessories such as ND filters which can be used. However, there are many other accessories that can be used with the Insta360 X4. Now when it comes to video, audio is pretty much just as important. The Insta360 X4 does have a couple of microphones built into it. However, if you want to get the best audio possible, you're going to need two accessories. Accessory number one is a bracket which allows you to attach microphones such as the Rode Wireless Go down the side of the Insta360 X4 so it's out of view. The second accessory is an adapter which goes inside the USB port, which allows you to attach anything with a 3.5mm jack into the 360 X4 to transfer your audio. And because both of these accessories go down the side of the Insta360 X4, it doesn't affect your footage even in 360 mode because the cameras can't see it. And because of the camera not being able to see that part of the image, that's how these 360 cameras get rid of the selfie stick, making it seem as if the camera is literally just floating in midair. But then you can also get a giant 3-meter selfie stick. Outrageous, I know. And also the bullet time handle so you can spin the X4 around you or your friends' heads. However, the tripod that is part of the bullet time handle isn't really ideal when it comes to any kind of time lapses. Ideally, if you're doing any kind of time lapses and you want the best quality, you should get yourself a sturdy tripod. But it also helps if you know how to calculate time lapses to begin with.
Well, obviously I'm really bad at maths.
Oh no.
Look at this, look. So I've been stood there, what, 4 minutes? That's it. I never realised how time consuming doing time lapses were.
Time consuming lapse.
So I just got back from my trip around Sherwood Pines, did the blue route. I'm a little bit muddy. 100% unfit. One of the main mounts I used was the heavy duty clamp, and with just this and the Insta360, it was pretty solid. No movement whatsoever, and you can mount it pretty much anywhere on the bike. But while I wanted to get a little bit of distance between the camera and the bike, I used the heavy duty clamp with the invisible selfie stick, and it did seem quite wobbly. Probably not the intended way to use it, but it's the only option I had. But I have to say, having a 360 camera, which you can just put anywhere you want and not worry about the framing and know that it's pretty much going to be okay, it makes life a lot easier.
So when it comes to the Insta360 X4, there isn't really much I don't like. The battery life is good, and as long as you put a high capacity memory card in it, you can record for a fairly long time. It's hard wearing, it can be used pretty much anywhere. At the end of the day, it's an action camera and it's designed for this kind of stuff. And let's face it, I'm only scratching the surface of what you can actually do with this camera and the environments you can put it in. We ain't going snowboarding, we ain't going skydiving, so get that right out of your head. But if that is more your vibe, the X4 has some recording preset options so you can find the recommended settings or just create your own preset if you wish. Now when I first got this camera, it was a bit of a learning curve. However, the workflow of using this camera is now a million times better than what it was. All of the footage you've seen from the Insta360 X4 has been edited inside the Insta360 Studio app. Not in Premiere Pro like I normally would, but why? The Insta360 Studio app does give you control over settings such as motion ND, which gives you the look of motion blur. So the lack of ND filters that I mentioned earlier, and also the auto exposure, isn't a major problem. Keyframing is so easy with the app, so we can easily reframe the view of the camera, you can add text, you can add transitions, and remember earlier how I said there is noise in certain parts of the image? Well, when you go to export the video in the Insta360 Studio, you have the option to remove all the noise and grain using AI. And even with that ticked, the export times are incredibly fast. And when I first got this camera and installed the Insta360 plugin for Premiere Pro, none of this was available. Even the reframing took far too long, just like everything else inside Premiere. And that is why I just haven't used Premiere to make this video. And after sending Insta360 a cheeky email explaining my frustrations with this, they must have had this room bugged in some way, shape or form, because within a couple of days, there was a new version of the plugin coming out for Premiere Pro, and it is so much better. We can now reframe all the footage from the Insta360 X4 just by dragging your mouse in the preview window. We have access to motion blur, which is the same as the motion ND inside the Insta360 Studio, making the workflow for this camera a million times better than it was just 2 months ago. So if you've already got an X4 and you haven't updated the plugin, make sure you do. And it's the same situation with the mobile app too. Pretty much everything you can do on the desktop version of the Insta360 Studio app, you can do on your mobile phone, and you can keep the footage somehow on the Insta360 camera and just stream it straight over to your mobile phone whilst you're editing. insane. All of this makes the Insta360 X4 easily one of the most fun cameras to use at this moment in time. I've seen it used loads on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram for anything from behind the scenes stuff, action sports, vlogging, the list is endless. I've enjoyed it that much and it's gave me a new lease of life, let's say, that I've already gone out and bought myself my own mountain bike. Call it an early midlife crisis or whatever you want. It's just... If you want to pick up one of these cameras or any of the accessories, I'll leave a link down below. And if you want to know anything more about this camera, let me know in the comments. I'll see you soon.